Okay, so have you ever imagined yourself like trapped in like a small, see-through box, face to face with a hungry polar? It's straight out of a nightmare. For this wildlife filmmaker, Gordon Buchanan,
Right.
this wasn't just, imagination. This was like a very chilling reality for him.
Yeah, and what I think is so interesting about this whole encounter is that this guy Buchanan, he's not new to dangerous wildlife.
Right.
But even he admits that this experience, this one, really pushed him to his limits.
Yeah, we're not talking about just like a casual stroll through the zoo.
Right, no.
This is the Arctic.
Yeah.
He was filming a mother polar bear and her cubs for a documentary.
Right.
And his home base was something called an ice cube. Essentially like a small transparent cage made of like reinforced plastic, kind of like a mobile observation post. But I mean, honestly, it kind of looks like a vending machine for polar bears.
Oh, wow.
Which in this case wasn't exactly ideal.
Yeah, I was going to say the vulnerability of that setup is, can you imagine being surrounded by this vast icy landscape and you're essentially encased in a clear box with a predator as powerful as a polar bear just lurking nearby?
Right.
I mean, the tension in that situation has got to be just palpable.
Absolutely. This wasn't a controlled environment. This was the wild. And what happened next is what makes this encounter so captivating. It wasn't a case of like the bear being startled or defensive. This polar bear, a massive female, 7 feet tall, weighing over 500 kilograms. She targeted Buchanan specifically, saw him as like a potential meal.
Her behavior, it wasn't driven by, territoriality or like maternal instincts. It was purely predatory behavior. She was sizing him up as a food source. Like the article that we have, it describes her sniffing in his direction. Her eyes are locked on him, almost like a hunter evaluating its prey.
Okay, so picture this. The sound of her claws scraping against the plastic of this ice cube, her hot breath fogging up the barrier between them.
Oh, man.
It's like something out of a horror movie, except this was real.
Wow.
The article even mentions that Buchanan's heartbeat was so loud it was picked up by his microphone.
Oh, wow. Talk about pressure.
I know, right?
But what's so remarkable is that despite this terrifying ordeal, Buchanan, he remained incredibly composed.
Right.
He kept filming, even narrating what was happening, almost as if he were describing a nature documentary, not facing his own, potential demise.
Yeah, that's what's so incredible about this whole thing. Like, how do you stay so calm in a situation like that? I mean, I'd like to think I would be brave, but who knows, right?
Yeah, well, it really is an incredible testament to human resilience, but there's also this fascinating psychological phenomenon at play here. It's called cognitive tunneling. Essentially, in these really high-stress situations, your brain can narrow its focus to only the most essential tasks. It filters out any extraneous emotions or thoughts that might hinder your ability to react effectively. It's like your brain is shifting into survival mode,
Yeah.
prioritizing actions over feelings. So it's like a sort of mental laser focus, honed in on that immediate threat and the necessary steps to survive.
So it's like your brain is saying, okay, we can panic later. Right now, we've got this polar bear situation to deal with.
Exactly, yeah. And in Buchanan's case, that laser focus was on continuing to document the encounter, maybe even as like a way of maintaining control in a situation where he really had very little.
Right. And he did keep filming through this whole terrifying ordeal. He described the bear's teeth and claws just scraping against the ice cube, her powerful body shaking the entire structure.
It gives me chills just thinking about it.
I know, right? And this wasn't just, a quick swipe. She was persistent, clearly intent on getting to him.
Right, and that raises a key question about polar bear behavior, right? Why was she so fixated on Buchanan? Was it simply because he was like the most accessible target? Or was there something about the ice cube itself that maybe triggered her predatory instincts?
Well, you know what they say about polar bears? They're incredibly intelligent and curious creatures, and their sense of smell is legendary. They can detect prey, in this case seals, from miles away.
Exactly. So it's possible that the ice cube, even though it's transparent, it might have still emitted enough of a scent to maybe pique her curiosity or even trigger those hunting instincts.
Right.
It's like she thought, there's something tasty in there, I'm going to get it.
And let's not forget, this bear was hungry.
Right.
The Arctic is a very harsh environment. Food can be scarce, especially as climate change impacts their hunting grounds.
And that environmental context is crucial to understanding her behavior, right? She wasn't being malicious. She was following her natural instincts in a very challenging environment.
It's like this perfect storm of factors collided. her hunger, the scent of the ice cube,
Yeah.
and Buchanan's vulnerable position.
Right.
But even with all of that, the attack didn't last forever.
Right, and that abrupt ending, I mean, it's just as fascinating as the attack itself. Suddenly she just walks away.
I know. So, let's unpack this for a second.
Okay.
What's so fascinating is that it suggests, even in this predatory state that she was in, polar bears are constantly calculating the effort to reward ratio.
Yeah.
So perhaps she realized that breaking into that reinforced box just wasn't worth the energy expenditure.
Right.
Especially if there were maybe easier prey options available.
Exactly. And this highlights a key takeaway about polar bear behavior. They're not just mindless killing machines. They're intelligent, adaptable creatures, making decisions based on this complex interplay of factors, including their environment, their physiological needs, and their assessment of risk versus reward.
So it's like, she thought, okay, this vending machine's jammed. I'm going to go find a snack somewhere else. And thankfully for Buchanan, the reward just didn't seem to outweigh the risk.
Yeah, he got really lucky there.
Yeah, it really makes you think about how these animals, they operate in the wild. They're constantly evaluating their surroundings and, making decisions based on instinct and experience.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if she had encountered something like the ice cube before.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe during some failed attempt to snatch a seal or something.
Yeah, that's entirely possible. Polar bears, they're known to kind of test and explore different objects in their environment.
Right.
There's even anecdotal evidence of them interacting with, research equipment.
Oh, wow.
Sometimes with surprising ingenuity.
Huh.
So it's not outlandish at all to think that she had learned from past encounters, that certain structures, they're just not worth the effort.
Right. It's like, okay, I've tried this metal box thing before, not worth it, moving on.
Exactly. And that adaptability, that's part of what makes them such successful predators, in such a challenging environment. All right, so she walks away.
Yeah.
And you can imagine the wave of relief that must have washed over Buchanan.
You can only imagine.
The article mentions he was shaken, obviously.
Right.
But also just incredibly grateful to have survived this whole ordeal.
Of course.
He even admitted that if she had managed to break through, that would have been it for him.
Wow.
No dramatic escape.
Right.
No second chances.
It's just a sobering reminder of the raw power of these animals and the inherent risks involved in observing them in their natural habitat.
I remember reading somewhere that Buchanan said this encounter was different from any other close call he's had.
Right.
I mean, he's had tigers charge at him, been mock charged by grizzlies, even chased by elephants twice.
Oh my God.
But those were warnings, right?
Yeah.
Displays of power.
Yeah.
This polar bear, she was hungry and she saw him as a meal.
Yeah, that distinction is crucial, right?
Yeah.
In those other encounters, the animals were communicating, establishing boundaries, maybe testing his reactions.
Right.
This time, it was purely predatory, her motivation.
Right.
It wasn't personal, it was survival.
It really underscores the importance of understanding animal behavior.
Yeah.
Especially for those who work closely with wildlife. It's about respecting their space.
Yeah.
Recognizing the cues they give and knowing when to back off.
Absolutely. It's not about anthropomorphizing their actions.
Right.
It's about understanding the motivations behind their behavior.
Right.
Recognizing that they're not acting out of spite or malice, but out of instinct and necessity.
And sometimes that necessity is driven by factors beyond their control, like climate change.
Right.
This encounter actually became part of a 3-part documentary called The Polar Bear Family and Me, which aired back in 2013.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
Yeah.
That documentary did a fantastic job of highlighting the impact of climate change on polar bears.
Right.
As the ice sheets melt, their primary hunting grounds shrink, forcing them to travel further and expend more energy in search of food. It's a stark reminder that these encounters, they're not just isolated incidents. They're often glimpses into these larger ecological narratives.
It's kind of ironic when you think about it.
Yeah.
Buchanan goes to the Arctic to film a documentary about polar bears.
Right.
And he ends up becoming part of the story in a way he never could have anticipated.
Oh, absolutely.
And not just any story, but one that highlights the very real threats facing these animals.
Exactly. It's a powerful example of how our actions, particularly regarding climate change, they have very direct consequences for these animals and their habitats.
Right.
The documentary, it showcased the harsh realities of a changing Arctic landscape.
Right.
Where, shrinking ice flows mean that polar bears are forced to spend more time on land, often closer to human settlements.
Right, which inevitably leads to more encounters like Buchanan's.
Exactly.
Right, it's not just about like the immediate danger of an attack, but it's about the
Yeah.
long-term consequences of habitat loss and the increasing pressure on these animals just to survive.
Precisely. And as those encounters become more frequent, the need for understanding and conservation, it becomes even more urgent.
The article mentions that there are estimated to be around 26,000 polar bears globally,
Yeah.
but getting like accurate numbers is tough.
You know what? That uncertainty, I think that's a reflection of the challenges facing polar bear conservation.
Right.
Because it's really hard to protect a species when you don't have a precise understanding of their population dynamics.
Right.
And with the Arctic environment changing so rapidly, tracking their movements and monitoring their numbers, it becomes increasingly difficult.
So we have this incredible story, right? A
Yeah.
tense encounter,
Yeah.
a display of both, animal power and human resilience,
Okay.
all set against the backdrop of like this changing Arctic landscape.
Exactly. And this encounter and the documentary it became a part of, it forces us to ask some tough questions about our own role in this changing world.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. What do you mean?
Well, the documentary wasn't just about showing a man in a box facing down a polar bear.
Right.
It was about raising awareness, of the interconnectedness of our planet.
Right.
How our actions in one part of the world, they can have ripple effects on ecosystems thousands of miles away.
It's funny when you think about it, that ice cube, that tiny, vulnerable space,
Yeah.
it becomes like a sort of microcosm of this like larger issue.
That's a great observation.
Yeah.
Because just like Buchanan was trapped in that box,
Right.
in a way, we're all kind of trapped on this planet, facing the consequences of our choices.
And just like that polar bear, we're all trying to survive to adapt to this changing environment.
Right.
But the question is, are we adapting fast enough?
That's the question, isn't it? And it's a question that lingers long after the credits roll on the documentary.
Right.
Because ultimately, the story of the polar bear, the story of climate change, it's our story too.
So here we have this encounter, this
Yeah.
incredible story of survival.
Yeah.
But it's not just about one man and one bear.
No,
It's a story that resonates far beyond the icy landscapes of the Arctic.
for sure.
It's a story that challenges us to think about our own relationship with the natural world, the impact we have on it, choices we make for the future.
I completely agree.
Yeah, it really does make you think about the choices we make.
He does.
I mean, here's Buchanan risking his life to document these creatures,
Right.
to bring their story to the world, and it's a story that's totally connected to our own.
Exactly. And that's what I think makes this whole, depth dive so compelling.
Right.
It's not just about the thrill of the encounter, it's about the deeper implications,
Yeah.
What does it mean to be a responsible observer of nature? How do we balance our fascination with wildlife with the need to protect them?
It's like that saying, take only pictures, leave only footprints. But in a world where climate change is altering those very landscapes we're trying to capture, it gets a lot more complex.
It really does. It reminds us that we're not just passive observers of the natural world.
Right.
Our actions, they have consequences, and those consequences, they're becoming increasingly evident even in the most remote corners of the planet.
I mean, going back to Buchanan for a second,
Yeah.
I'm still amazed by his reaction during the attack.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I'd like to think I'd stay calm in that situation, but who knows?
Right. It's easy to say when you're not staring down a hungry polar bear.
Exactly.
It's impossible to know how we truly react in such a high-pressure situation.
Right.
But, Buchanan's experience, it does offer this compelling example of the potential for human resilience,
Yeah.
even when facing extreme danger.
Right.
And perhaps it even highlights the power of training, experience, and a deep respect for the natural world.
So here's like a thought-provoking question, okay, for you, the listener. If you were in Buchanan's position, how do you think you would react? Would you be able to maintain that level of composure? Keep filming, narrate the whole thing, or would you be like hitting the eject button?